Welcome if you're just now getting on, and we're starting to welcome our attendees. So there's a poll up that you can do right now if you'd like, as you're waiting for us to get started. Look at you guys go. Those are fun. We'll be starting very soon. I think it just started streaming live on Facebook as well. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kathleen Benedict, and I am the Executive Director of the Pooter Heritage Alliance. The Pooter Heritage Alliance is a nonprofit 501c3 management entity for the Cashel-Pooter River National Heritage Area. There's over 55 national heritage areas in the U.S., and each one of them has a unique and national significance. They are designated by Congress. Ours is related to the development of water law, which framed and is still framing many of the attributes that are provided by the Cashel-Pooter River to the arid West. The PHA serves the cache by providing future and current generations the opportunity to understand and celebrate the area of the Cashel-Pooter River. And this is through promoting history and cultural opportunities, as well as engaging people with the Cashel-Pooter River and inspiring learning, preservation, and stewardship throughout the region. The National Park Foundation provided the Cashel-Pooter River National Heritage Area a grant in order to bring to you today Lifting Voices from the Shadows. They wanted us to build on our connections with Native American history in our region, as well as telling the story of the unique Western perspective on the 19th Amendment and the women's right to vote, a story from the Native American point of view, which is a story that's not often told. Before I go and turn this over to the panel, which I'm sure you'd rather hear from than me at this point, I want to give you just a few housekeeping efforts for you. The chat feature of this Zoom meeting has been turned off, but if you have any questions, please send them via the Q&A button that is located at the bottom of your screen. General questions will be answered as soon as possible, although if we get too many, just realize not all of them will be able to be entertained during this webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be available after the event, as well as live streaming on Facebook as we speak. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I'm really excited now to turn this over to our moderator of the panel, Tiffany Kelly. Enjoy, and we look forward to hearing all your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. Hello everyone, halito. My name is Tiffany Kelly. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, currently working at the Native American Cultural Center at Colorado State University. As we begin today, I would first like to share a recognition of place. For Indigenous peoples, our histories and identities are intimately linked to place. In today's context, recognitions of place or land acknowledgements are one way to honor and recognize the importance of this living connection and work towards a more comprehensive and inclusive history, as well as shared responsibility and commitment to Indigenous communities. So even though we are virtual today, those of us that are on the panel, we all live and we work in places that are historical and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples, as well as numerous other tribes that used this area for trade and travel throughout time. As you listen to this acknowledgement and the stories that are shared today in this panel, we ask each of you to reflect on your own responsibility to the land and to Native and Indigenous communities. I would like now to recognize and invite our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves before we get going. Andy, could we start with you?
Dos Nateina, Vitati Gausini, Hisse Jotna Sitna, Hinaniina, Naa, Nanana, Newa Nanana, Nehe Nanana, Nahebehet Nanana. Nebi nanana, Ninafu nanana, Niitajana da anto na, Niitajana da anto no. Hello, my relatives. My name is Coming Woman. I'm Northern Arapaho. I'm a mom. I'm a grandma. I'm an auntie. I'm a big sister. I'm a little sister. I'm a politician. I'm a proud Democrat serving in the Wyoming House of Representatives. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Andy. Felita, how about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Felita Charlie. I'm a postdoc fellow at Colorado State University, and that means I got my PhD in 2018. I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, so I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Felita. Sasha, how about you?
Bonjour, Zashaki nang akwen dejanakaz, miskwagamiwi sagi gunning in Donjaba, Makwan Dundam. Hello, my name is Earth Star Woman, but please call me Sasha Strong. I'm from the Red Lake Nation in northern Minnesota, and I'm of the Bear Clan. I'm currently in my final year of law school at the University of Colorado Law. My studies focus on American Indian law and the intersection with family law, so the Indian Child Welfare Act, also known as ICWA. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves, and just thank you for being here today. Doing things virtually, definitely gives us some barriers in terms of having these types of conversations, but we're excited for everyone that's joining us today and for our panelists to be here in community, even though it's virtual, to have some conversation and talk about some really important issues. So our panel today is entitled, After 100 Years, Native Women Still Face Barriers Voting as First Americans. Many Native, Black, Latina, and Asian women were instrumental in the suffragette movement, but are still often left out of the conversation or given credit for the work that they put in to helping pass this 19th Amendment, and an amendment that would ultimately still prohibit them from exercising their right to vote, even though they helped fight for it. As Native peoples, we live in a reality that has a history of violence, forced assimilation, and immense invisibility in the larger US society. However, throughout this time, Native women have been at the forefront of the fight, consistently participating and leading activist movements that are helping lead to larger conversations around Native issues, inclusion, which include voting issues and representation. So to begin understanding the complex nature of these issues, I want to share some background and context that might help with the conversation. In the United States today, there are 574 federally recognized Native American tribes who are functioning governments, sovereigns that maintain individual government-to-government relationships with the United States. Tribes exercise degrees of civil, criminal, and regulatory jurisdiction, and there's an entire section of the United States Code, Title 25, that consists of laws applying just to them. In 1924, the Indian Citizenship Act formally made Native Americans US citizens, but states continued to prevent them from voting for much longer, arguing many things, including that Natives did not pay taxes, that they were under the guardianship of the US and therefore were incompetent to vote, that we were not literate in English, and that we were more citizens of the tribes to which we had close ties to and our tribal culture to be citizens of the states in which we lived in. So this fight continued well up into the civil rights era in the 60s. With the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 had the effect of bringing voting rights to Indian country, and Native Americans began to really challenge many of the barriers that were happening at the time, as well as what are still happening today, in order to exercise our right to vote. I want to bring attention to the Native Americans Right Fund, who recently did a really comprehensive and in-depth study about voting issues in Native American communities and released a really great report that I think is a really great resource for folks that are interested in learning more about this issue. It was released in June of 2020. It was titled Obstacles at Every Turn, Barriers to Political Participation Faced by Native American Voters. So I want to highlight a couple of the things that they mention at the beginning of the report in terms of some of these barriers and some of the issues that our communities are still facing. They shared that these continual barriers exist and are strong forces that aim to prevent the full political participation of Native people in voting and exercising our rights. Some of the factors that they attributed this to are geographical isolation, physical and natural barriers, poorly maintained and non-existent roads, distant and limited hours of governmental buildings and offices, technological barriers and the digital divide, non-traditional mailing addresses such as post office boxes, lack of funding for election, and just overall discrimination for Native peoples. So the goal of our panel today, and really the conversation that we're hoping to have, is to illuminate some of these issues and share the personal experiences of these Native women who are leaders in our community, who are doing this work and who are passionate about these issues, to talk about the barriers, the work that they're doing, and the passion that they have for breaking down these barriers and working hard for our communities to have our voices heard and to make a difference. I'm going to give our panelists time to just answer the questions first, and then we'll get into some more type of conversation between the panelists. Andy, I would like to ask you the first question. All of the women on the panel today, all of us are involved in various ways in our tribal and Indigenous communities. What do you see as some of the most important issues in the lives of Native women today as it relates to voting and representation?
As the first Northern Arapaho woman to serve in the Wyoming House of Representatives, my job is not to work within what is possible. My job is to change what is possible. That's very important and crucial. My journey and my experiences growing up on Wind River here in central Wyoming with colonization is women have a tough journey with colonization and suppressing women, suppressing their voices and their places at tables has been a long time coming. So trying to overcome that, find the voices and empower young people, women, strong Indigenous women, to have a voice and that their voice is important and it's valued is very important. And so I work hard at that, acknowledging them, welcoming them to the table, empowering them, and just reminding them that we as Indigenous people are very perseverant and resilient despite all that. And we are the backbones of our communities. We are embedded leaders, given the right to give birth, that honor to give life. It's very important that we hold as women. We run the households, we run the families. We are the embedded leaders and people look up to that. And it's just empowering them to see themselves that way in our local, in our county, in our state and national politics. And that our legislation and policies, they affect our day-to-day life. We may not realize that, but my effort here is to really have people acknowledge that, finding the commonalities, living on a reservation, living in the world we come from, that it's important, and to transition that is important, and finding our strengths in that and knowing that we don't have to give up everything. We can acknowledge, we can stand up and earn the right to be respected and be listened to. You know, when I talk to people in my district and I hear what they want to say, the women, it's just equality. And I hear that a lot because I'm from a state that's the equality state, right? 1869, we got the vote. When we had come in, we're technically 150 years of the woman having the right to vote, the 44th state to come into the Union, you know, and getting pressure from the federal government to take away that vote from women. And fortunate enough that people in Wyoming stood up against that and said, you know, we won't enter the Union without our women. That's very important. So that's my effort. That's my passion. And it's with our young people too, in visiting our young people and inspiring our young girls in schools and educating. And so I really try to go to the schools and I try to educate them that I grew up on the res. I'm them all the way from kindergarten to the high school. I graduated. They can see themselves in me, and it's possible to do anything.
Thank you. Sasha, I'm going to come to you with our next question. What are some of the current barriers that still exist today for Native women to exercise their right to vote?
Thank you for the question, Tiffany. It's a good question. I have 6 points to talk about. So I think first and foremost, legislatures are one of the biggest barriers for Native women to vote, Natives generally, in fact. When you have legislatures in rural areas, they're creating the rules around voting. A prime example of that is in North Dakota. They had voter suppression going on, where most people on the reservation had P.O. boxes on their IDs. The rule was that it had to be a residential address, so that wiped out an entire fleet of votes, of potential votes. This is something I'll talk about later, but the Native American Voting Rights Act has been introduced, and that addresses a lot of the issues that I'll talk about. It's really important to elect people that will push forward an agenda that behooves and benefits Native peoples and Native women in particular. everything's tied together between electoral procedures and representation. But largely, I believe that legislatures are one of the bigger barriers to the Native vote. And going off of that, there's gerrymandering. It doesn't happen everywhere, but gerrymandering can split the Native vote when district lines are cut through a reservation or cut through a city with a large population. So gerrymandering can be an issue. I know Tiffany spoke about accessibility. So a lot of times polling stations will be put into places that are off the reservation or just too far. Transportation can be an issue and things like that. I know, at least with my tribe, they try to, on Facebook, post like, call this number for a ride to the poll. But that brings me to my next point. Not everyone has internet access. And we're in an increasingly technological world now, especially with COVID-19. Everything is online. As we sit here today, I would much rather be sitting in a room with all of you right now than just sitting in my basement talking. But we live in a world that's increasingly technological, and not everyone has access to broadband and Wi-Fi. And that brings me to my next point, which is lack of information. When you're campaigning, you're doing most of it online. Even prior to COVID, a lot of it's been TV and Facebook and online platforms and things like that. When you're not getting the information to know who to vote for, you're not going to be as impassioned to go vote. And that brings me to my fifth point. A lot of politicians don't campaign for the Native vote. Why would I go vote for you if I don't even know who you are because you haven't made the effort to even make yourself known to me? Lastly, there's this really unfortunate general belief that your vote just doesn't matter. I hear it all the time. I'm only one person. What am I going to do? This is a system that has been designed to oppress me. What is my one vote going to actually accomplish? I think along with changing stigma and the conversation and the narrative around voting will be a huge help as far as increasing Native voting, and especially for women who, like Representative Andy Clifford said, we're a matriarchal society, yet we don't necessarily see our power, how powerful and beautiful we are as women. Switching that narrative, I think, is really big key to that point. There might be hope if we can get the Native American Voting Rights Act to pass in Congress. It's going to address many of the issues that I've just spoken about.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. All right, Felita, next question. What has been your experience as a Native woman and leader in the communities that you were a part of?
So, hi everyone again. I'm from the Navajo Nation. I grew up on the Navajo Nation, and I've only really lived off the Navajo Nation for the last, 7 years? With this, there's quite a bit. My experience has been hard. First of all, I had a hard time finding role models, just to find them, like any Native person, even Native women, to actually look up to. And this is me from a young age. I mean, I looked up at my mom. She was the one like, oh, you need to do this. Oh, you need to learn this. But there was still some times where there was some other stuff I wanted to learn. And getting my secondary education, it was kind of hard because I did not have those role models. Now, as I see myself as a role model for several people, I'm trying to make it bigger, but it's kind of hard because, as the other two pointed out, we on the reservation do not have a lot of internet. Somebody was once the other day just told me like, oh, you can just go and send them the link. I was like, that's not how it works. You have to be physically there for people to see you. And they're like, what? I don't believe that. I was like, yes, you have to be physically on the reservation. You have to be physically going to schools, talking to, students that way. So I go back every couple of years, or whenever they invite me to Fort Lewis College, where I got my undergrad, and I give a talk there. I meet new students there, and they're like, oh, wow, I can't believe you're doing this. You're Navajo, you're from this area. You did this, so that means I can do it. It's a lot of things that makes this hard, but I love it. I love it when somebody reaches out to me and says, oh, can I talk to you about some stuff? I'm thinking of doing this even further. And I was like, oh yeah, I can talk to you. Just tell me when I can talk to you. And as long as I put on my calendar too, because we're busy too, or I'm busy, if they can set a time and a date, then I'll talk to them. It's really comforting to hear somebody else tell you that with these experiences, you feel are like you understand. Because I grew up on the reservation. I had that kind of education there. When I started my secondary, there was a lot of catching up to do, stuff I didn't learn in high school, I had to learn, and I'm still learning stuff. But this is here too, is where I really started to look at the votes and what they mean. It's only because I really looked at it. And yeah, I do come across with some people that I don't know when we're voting. So I'm just like, I have no idea who he is. I have no clue. Even somebody as educated as I am will come across people you don't know that you're trying to vote, and you're just like, I kind of don't know who I'm voting for. It's kind of hard, and you're trying to talk to people to tell them to vote, and they want to know why. So many of them like, okay, why should we vote? Why should we do this? Why should we do that? It's hard, but it's hard work I like. So it keeps me busy. In the communities, I've been involved in several communities, and I've seen how they operate. There's still a lot of stuff to learn, and it's still learning both ways. But I'm glad that I'm becoming a leader in the community, getting out there, talking to people, telling them my experiences, and just interacting with everybody. That's what I like when I go back. You interact with a lot more people, you talk to them, and you listen. And as long as they have somebody to listen, then you kind of create your way of talking. So some of the communities I work with, we deal with the uranium miners and their families. We talk to them and we tell them, what do you want to know more of? They actually told us certain questions that they want answers to, which I took the questions, I researched them, I found stuff that relate to them, and then I explained it there. And a lot of it was picture version explanation, because a lot of people don't, when you read stuff, it's kind of like you read it, but it comes out different. But the pictures are just acting it out. Oh, this is what this, here, because a lot of the words too do not translate over. The language is still catching up with a lot of the technical terms, is what I mean too. Well, that's my point of view.
Thank you. I'd love to hear from the three of you, and why did you become involved in the various aspects? So we've got, in education, law, politics, community building, all of you are involved in a lot of different things, serving as a role model that you all talked about. Why did you become passionate about these issues, and what kind of drove you to doing what you're doing in the roles that you're in now? The why? Why do you do this work?
Great question. It's just in us, the heart and the perseverance and the passion to want to see your communities live happy, healthy lives. If we have avenues and resources and possibly good role models, it may be easier for some, but we are perseverant and resilient. I really think our ways of knowing, our cultural beliefs, our morals, just our grounding in what it is to be an Indigenous woman, we have those qualities. It's frustrating, and I like what the panelists have said. It could be overwhelming. It's very frustrating. It's easy. It could be so easy to give up. Could be so easy, especially in this time that we're in right now. It'd be just so easy to give up. It does get hard, and I do get overwhelmed. I do get stressed. I just dust myself off. I look at my children. I look at my grandbabies. I look at my people. I look at my elders. And I just keep forging ahead because I have to. I can't give up. I realize that I'm in a position of power and authority. as a state legislature that I have little ones looking at me. And even though I get stressed and overwhelmed, I know they're looking at me. I know I wear the hat humbly of a role model. I have to show them if I want change for the better. And I think of my ancestors, and I think of our grandparents. I think of the boarding schools. I think of the adoptions just being scooped and taken away and not knowing who you are. I think of all of that being beaten for speaking your language, for walking down the hallway and talking to a sibling, all of that. That's why I do what I do. I have to keep doing it. It has to be better. I take strength in our young people. Seeing them, what I see is they're becoming more engaged. It's inspiring to see, so they inspire me too. In establishing this platform, making it as strong as I can make it, knowing I'm only going to go so far, but we're leading the path for the people behind us. I think that's important. I have to help. I can't just stand on the sidelines. I've seen it driving into town. 14 miles was a treat to ride with grandma and grandpa. And then you hear nothing about Arapaho being spoken. And I'm going down Main Street, and I knew I was going to get a Pepsi. I knew I was going to get a candy. It was just a big treat. I remember them driving down Main Street and talking about the businesses, here's this business, and pointing out they had the sign, no dogs or Indians allowed, and these guys, and 10 years ago they let us in, and these guys. That's reality. I remember driving down Main Street. We have to show up. We have to make things better. It's the little things that go a long way. Just like growing up and going to the university, going to school, just being in the legislature. I could tell you the first day after I was sworn in, I was scared. There was a big weight on my shoulders, is I'm going to be passing laws, hundreds of laws. I don't know all of them. I got to make the best informed decision that I can, but I have to do my part and not be afraid. I think of my grandparents that way, and the times they grew up on. Things have gotten better, but there's still a lot of improvement to have women have the respect of voting, to feel welcomed, that I can sit there at tables and represent. I bring a breath of good knowledge, and I want good things for people. And it's all people, not just Indigenous people. It's everybody. And I think we have that in all of us.
Thank you. Sasha, coming to you.
So I would just like to echo everything that Andy has said. I feel that there is just something innate inside of us through our resilience and our history and everything that just points to us being here for our communities. For me, as I mentioned earlier, my area of practice is ICWA, so child welfare. I'm currently a student attorney in the University of Colorado Law Clinic, so I practice under my supervisor's bar license. I'm extremely, extremely passionate about child welfare. Reason that is because of like personal things in my life. I'm very open, and I think it's okay to be open about things about your past. So my auntie was taken to a boarding school, and that trauma has just lingered in our family. So I already knew that I had some passion for it. And then I was taken by Child Protective Services when I was a baby. Even though I don't remember it, I can see the pain in my parents' faces. I do everything in my power to keep families together. I think that a lot of that passion has come from personal experience and just a general empathy for everything that's going on with our Indigenous families. That's where my passion comes from. I've done a lot of other stuff for the community as well, but that's really where my focus is for child welfare, and that's where my passion comes from. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Felita, what about you?
I am passionate because I was tired of basically when I got sick, you go to IHS, so Indian Health Service. You go there and you sit there for like 2 to 3 hours to see a doctor, and the doctor doesn't really listen. They kind of just like, oh, we can give you this and this and this, then on to the pharmacy. I did not like that. It's overwhelmed. A lot of it's not understood about people and understanding your body. It's hard. Yeah, I get overwhelmed, but I wanted an understanding of stuff you can't visually see that make you sick. And that's why my background is pathology. So I like little viruses and bacteria. I like to understand what sicknesses they cause and why they cause it. I was always interested in that. It always reminds me of a time when one of my brothers, he was sick and his cough changed over time. And I told him he went back 3 times, and it wasn't until the 3rd time that the doctor is like, oh yeah, you have pneumonia. So that's where you have fluid in your lungs build up. He goes, yeah. He goes, the reason why I came back is because my sister kept telling me my cough is different. Like, that's just listening and observing. That's my passion, is to understand the data, like why we get sick more, why anything can change over time, or what has changed over time. And that's kind of related to what I'm doing now. We do community outreach with a certain community on the Navajo Nation, and we listen to the concerns, and then we design research projects around it. And that's why we're trying to tell them, like, okay, you did this and this and this, so maybe that way was wrong, so we need to try it this way. That's why I'm passionate about it, is because health changes all the time too, and there's not really good understanding of it, especially with stuff you don't see, mainly viruses and bacteria. Parasites do cause that too, so that's my passion.
Thank you. And thank you to all 3 for sharing those stories and kind of some of your path into where you're at. As folks are listening, if you have questions, please send those in. We'll start looking at questions and asking the panelists. Reminder to folks that we need to be bipartisan and not tell folks how to vote, not who to vote for, but to vote. A lot of you talked about location as some of the barriers, right? Or some of you in a variety of ways. So one of the questions that came in is for folks that, you know, are not living on a reservation, or their tribal lands, or are away from it, or in urban areas, because our communities are so spread out. What do you think can some of that outreach look like, or some of that community building around talking about voting and getting people to vote, getting them excited about, or like learning about those opportunities? And I think some folks brought that up. This person specifically talked about not being from their reservation and sometimes feeling that disconnect. And so wanting to engage both in tribal politics as well as federal politics. I don't know if all 3 of you want to answer, if anyone wants to jump on that, but what are some of your thoughts or ideas of how to engage both tribal, like on tribal land reservations, as well as in other areas?
With the tribal one, is I'm still enrolled as a member of the Navajo Nation, but I have to fill out basically every year is an absentee ballot for the Navajo Nation. With this, they've gotten better to where I can just fill out the form, scan it, and email it. Before it used to be like fax, and it's been interesting. But there are times too when I do go home, my dad will like, oh, you need to vote. This is what they're trying to do, and you got to vote no, because that just takes away from this. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, let's go over there. So then we go to the voting place, which they actually have an office in Shiprock. So I would just go there and say, can I just vote right now before anything else, before it ends? Because they give you a certain time when it ends. Can go to just the office and get your forms. They double check everything first, like you're enrolled member, you're enrolled in the tribe, but you're also in part of one of the chapters, they call them. They like, okay, yeah, we can do that. And then you get your ballot and you fill it out on one of those little booths, the ballot booth. So you fill it out and then you just turn it, you put it in a sleeve and then you turn it back in. That's one way I deal with it, is I do go back from time to time. I do the absentee ballot. It's a lot of too just listening to my dad, and he likes to talk about politics. So that's one thing I do.
So I think absentee ballot or absentee voting and off-res enrolled members is a huge issue in Indian country. One way that I have seen that issue been solved, not necessarily solved, but helped a little bit more. My brother is currently our elected tribal secretary. A lot of times our off-res members just felt really ignored during campaigns and stuff like that. I watched my brother just travel all over the state of Minnesota to really reach every single member. So I think inspiring, at least in our tribal elections, to really be able to access all of our voters is a huge part of it, because I do think that there is that issue with absentee voting. Absentee voting in itself can be, like Felita has said, it can be a pain. I think inspiring and making off-res natives feel included would be a really big help as far as getting voter participation.
I have to agree with everything that's been said, and I'm fortunate for my tribe here and the Eastern Shoshone tribe as well. I represent both tribes, Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone. They do well with their absentee voting, and one thing good is they reach out to tribal members who don't live here on the reservation. From my experience and what I've seen is they have a pretty good process as far as if a tribal member requests an absentee ballot, they'll get that to them for the primary and our general elections. That's good, but there's always room for improvement to make people feel involved, engaged as a part of the system, that they have a voice, particularly in tribal politics. And I can tell you, my husband's enrolled Ogallala Lakota from Pine Ridge. I was shocked. We went back, built a shed for his mom last week, talking about politics, border patrols going on, and the conflict kind of with that. And so we had his brother coming over and helping and talking. I didn't realize that my husband, because he doesn't live on the reservation, he can't vote, even though he's enrolled. And I was like, what? So all the, enrolled Ogallala Lakota members are disenfranchised. And I can't fathom that. It's just really, it was a shock. I was just really, really, really shocked. I think it's just all these systems of colonization and oppression and suppression and all their phases for all of the 574 recognized tribes is becoming educated, empowering, and challenging. Like, why do we do this? Going back to our historical traumas and all the stories for why we do things, right, that we do, and a lot of it's grounded in the trauma. But empowering and becoming educated and aware, and important to involve everybody to be a part of the process, to be part of democracy, to have a say, that we should include everybody. I think we have to have those crucial combos. We really have to question, why do we do that? I would pose that question to my husband's tribe. Why don't you? Why not? Why don't you let your enrolled members who live off the reservation not participate in your tribal government, in tribal elections? It's very important. I think we could do more, and we could help other tribes. It's just a discussion. I hope young people are listening. That's a challenge, to have these conversations. And of course, change is tough. We always can't be stuck in our victim, villain, and helpless stories. We always have to master our stories. By mastering our stories, we have to be open-minded. We have to be willing to learn and listen, be able to be flexible, and to be able to change for the better. And I think with our young people, I see that happening more. And hopefully tribes like my husband's will include all of their members to participate in their elections, to increase voter access and voter participation, and to have a say. A lot going on. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all. That's actually a really good segue into some of the other questions similarly around how do we get our young people to vote? They are accessing things differently on social media and on their smartphones and things like that, but what can we do to engage the young voters in the process, or to help them feel like this is important? Like you're saying, a large number of our population are young people, and in these movements across the country, we're seeing young people really step up to be those voices and fight for change and equality. What do you all think? What does it look like to engage our young people to be excited about voting in national elections, state elections, tribal elections, etc.?
It's inspiring to see the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of our Indigenous brothers and sisters get involved in that for a lot of good reasons. For people of color, I think it's that transition of what gets them out there. It's having a discussion, just to ask them a question and gather them around a Zoom meeting, because we can't do tables. I have to do things different for my re-election campaign, just to have a conversation over a meal type thing. And we just really need to take time to listen to them and ask questions, what's important to them. In my experience, what I see with young people is our climate is Mother Earth. You see that passion of taking care of her and the global warming issues and all those kind of issues. What I see in my youth, that's important. It inspires them. It caused them to act, to go and protest, to go and walk, to go and speak up and speak out. That's good to see, and we have to keep that momentum. And I like what Sasha said when she talks about the barriers that make a lot of laws. I have a lot of those colleagues, but those issues come up with my experience in the legislature. We talk about water. We talk about our resources, our trees, our forests, our ground, our land, our plants, our animals. I mean, all of that is in legislation, and it's just taking the time to say, find your passion, little baby steps. What is that? Whether it's climate or it's water is important. Here I have bills. There's 10 bills in Wyoming coming up in the next session that deal with water. I think having those kind of conversation and tying them back to this affects us here at Wind River, but it also affects us because we're all tribal members of Indigenous communities, but then we're also citizens of our states as well and of the nation. I think tying those kind of and having those conversations and what inspires them, I think I can bridge that. And it could be education, and we have tons of education legislation, and what's your passion on that? I try to invite people down all the time to come to the Capitol, to reach out to me. With our platform now, there is a lot of silver linings with this pandemic that we're in, is having to use technology. But again, acknowledging that a lot of our people don't have good access of the internet. So they can't get on online, or minutes run out. They have prepaid phones, so just a real short time periods of when they can get on, so it's not consistent. There's a lot of those barriers that we have to overcome as people. We'll have those conversations with this pandemic as far as schools opening up. Again, silver linings that I hope a lot of our Indigenous communities invest in broadband. We're going to do a hybrid, or we're going to go online, we're going to do remote, we're going to rotate and go in person into school. I mean, there's a lot of this, and it's only going to take that one outbreak, right? An outbreak, whether it's an employee in a school district or a child. We as Indigenous people tend to value our people over profit, over money, and it's just in us as the values. You know, we're in unprecedented times. I think we be flexible, we navigate, we have our power of our ways and prayers, and looking to make the best decisions to the best of our abilities in the times that we are in. For youth, again, there's passions, we see it. Getting on Instagram and Snapchat, I have to do a lot better job than that. My data is showing a lot of my youth, Indigenous youth, are on those platforms more so than Facebook. So it's utilizing that technology and having conversations and reaching out to them. Thank you.
I'll just quickly add, I was trying to think about how to articulate this, because in some ways what I'm about to say is going to sound contradictory a little bit, but going off of what Andy said about momentum and narrative, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that there is momentum within the young people's generation for decolonization. And so here's where it's going to sound a little contradictory, but just bear with me. If we preface the conversation that voting is actually decolonizing because we're inserting ourselves into a system that was never meant to benefit us, then I think that will help with the momentum. That being said, I do understand that there is a lot of conversation about becoming just a participant in the colonizer's system. But I personally believe that by inserting ourselves, Representative Andy Clifford, I am so honored to know you. You bring that to the table. You bring that representation in a system that was never designed for you. In the same way that Felita is in pathology and I'm in law school, we're doing the thing. If we can add the access and right to vote as part of the message of decolonization, that would add to the momentum that has already been building over the last few years, especially with the young people.
Lita, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I wanted to add, even though you see people, we talk about access and stuff, but it's very hard for people in rural areas to get access. We're here on Zoom right now, but for people in the community I'm working with, there's only one reliable place that has Wi-Fi access. That place gets called the chapter, so the chapter house. It's where these communities can come together, but at the same time, it's hard because this internet access is the lowest point. So we talk about internet access like it goes up to 1 gigabyte speed or these high speed internets, but the one on the reservation, the one we can partially access, are the low ones, which you will, if you ever like to watch something, it's best to download it before you go to a rural area, because then you won't really get it, and it's like lagging and it's skipping and it won't download, and it is hard. It's all like you're trying to promote to vote, but then you have to kind of go out there first and promote and then see what their situation is, because not everybody has access. Some people say, oh yeah, I got some internet access. I was like, oh, then you can look this up. You can check this site and start giving a list once you've actually interacted with somebody. But it's going to be hard with our limited access to technology. And that's what a lot of people don't get is we do have it. And I know when I go home, there's some areas where I don't have internet access. I could call, but I might have a chance of dropping the call. So I'm like, oh, don't rely on it too much. It's everywhere. And I was glad to be introduced to Andy here, because I don't know a lot of people in the legislation or in the Congress, or I'm like, oh wow, there's that person. And then it's like you go and look them up and you read more. It's kind of getting there to where you have to see these people in person. That's all I wanted to add.
Like a lot of folks are asking you, is this across the board in all reservations or tribal areas? This issue of internet, how do we fix it? Is radio an option? And that could probably be in and of itself a whole panel around how to talk about some of these things. But I don't know if anybody wants to quickly add. A lot of tribes are talking about this and are thinking about solutions. When we talk about these 574 federally recognized tribes, we're talking about 574 distinct tribal nations that do things differently, that are having different conversations. It's hard to say across the board what's being done, but I don't know if anybody wants to add thoughts around what you know is happening maybe in your area to help combat this. There are things being done, but there were a lot of questions coming in about how do we fix that problem, or is radio a better solution?
So I can add, on the Navajo reservation, there's 2, but there could be 3. They're Navajo stations. You do listen and they do promote stuff. There's also, well, I don't think the fairs are going on this year. So there's the fairs too. That's how basically the Navajo Nation meets candidates. So the governor of New Mexico, the previous governors of New Mexico, they actually walked in the Northern Navajo Fair. They interacted with the Navajo people that way. I see you, I know who you are. So there are some stuff being done. You can advertise over radio, but again, it's still a lot of you have to see the person. Like there's no way around that. So.
This is maybe crazy, and if there are any Indian law professors out there, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe you could make an argument that under the Indian Education Act, that the government has a trust responsibility to be providing these avenues of communication. So I don't know, that might be a far stretched argument, but maybe that could be made.
That's a good one. That's really good. I like that argument. We need to not give up. For me, I would suggest people to talk to your tribal leaders, your council, your president, whatever form of government you have to reach out. Reach out to your educational leaders as well. Reach out to your school boards, people on the school board, and just say, we need internet access. I am fortunate, we are fortunate that our leaders here for the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone, they're allocating some of their CARES dollars to broadband and Wi-Fi. They realize that's very important, especially going into the pandemic, possibly going into a second wave. Don't give up. I know we hear, and I hear it, they don't listen. I mean, they have the same complaints as any politician, would be our tribal elected officials as well. We're in a crucial moment where I think they are listening in a different way. And I know as a state legislature, elected official too, I listen in a different way. We're looking at things differently because we have to. Unprecedented times here. I would just encourage you to keep reaching out. You have a platform. If you have access to the internet or you have your phone, I see it a lot, see it across Indian country. Really good memes, good education. I learned more in the last few years about other tribes and what they're doing. Mainly my social media is Facebook. When people post a lot of the shares and good information that tribal leaders want to know from people, and we're learning, right? We learn from other tribes. I'm always one to not reinvent the wheel, but you tweak it and you make it good for you. So maybe what works here at Wind River is not going to work down at Navajo Nation or, in Minnesota or in South Dakota, but you tweak it and you make it Lakota, you make it Navajo, you make it what it is. That's an honor that we have, and I think that's what we need to promote, is what works for us, and to be proud that we're different and that we're unique as Indigenous people with a unique, distinct political relationship that no other people have, that we have. Don't give up. Keep reaching out to your leaders and tell them what you need. Give your opinions. That's my suggestion. Thanks.
So we're gonna pause for another polling question, give our panelists a little quick breather. I think that's gonna pop up on your screen. There it is. If you would like to participate, and then we've got time for probably a couple more questions. While are participating, thank you for the engagement. It's kind of the easiest way to try to engage participants. Just letting folks out there know, at one point we were about at 96 participants, so thank you all for joining us today. We're very appreciative. Some folks are asking, what can non-Native, non-Indigenous, non-First Americans do to aid in our fight for voting rights, to breaking down some of these barriers, to be collaborators and allies in this work? What are some maybe thoughts that you all have, things that you've seen done, ideas, etc.?
If they want to promote and help Indigenous people, please make sure they're at the table and that you're listening to their voices. If you want to amplify our voices as far as voting, make sure they're at the table, they're there, they have a space to talk and to be listened to and to be respected. The other thing, money. I'm just going to be upfront. There's a lot of good organizations and effort to do the work. Everything that we talked about takes money. If you really want to help, donate financially. A lot of good organizations out there that are doing great things. You could write a check or send PayPal, Venmo. We have a lot of technology to send money that way. That's important. That's very crucial to the cause. Thanks.
Something that I think applies to most people of color is this idea of do your own research first, and then if you really don't understand what you're researching, then come to us. But it shouldn't be our burden to have to answer everything that you might be curious or interested about furthering, if that looks like finding out what states are having some kind of crappy laws for Native voting, things like that. If you can figure it out on your own and then call that representative and be like, no, that bypasses us having to carry that burden on our shoulders.
I would like to add too, if you can't donate money, donate skills. If you're a graphic web designer, you can write really well or whatever that is. There's, other than donating money, you can offer your skills as well. That'd be awesome.
Have a picture version. A lot of people understand pictures well better than actual writing because it's kind of hard when you read something and you're like, I think it means this, but it's coming from this organization, so it could mean this. If you just have a picture version and think about it, but again, that's just in addition to what the other two said.
We had quite a few folks comment in, like, what are some orgs that you all love and think are great organizations that maybe are local to your area or national that are doing some really good work that maybe you want to uplift or highlight? And if you don't have any off the top of your head, I think that's fine. People can Google, right? There's a lot of ways to figure out what are some great local organizations or people that are doing good work in tribal communities that are tribally run or run by Native and Indigenous folks. But I don't know if anyone had any ones they wanted to highlight really quick since we had some people ask.
I would like to give a plug. We have a good, here at Wind River is the Wind River Native Advocacy Center does a lot of good work, empowering and educating and making our people aware, getting involved in local, state, county processes. So Wind River Native Advocacy, I'll give a plug for them. You could Google it in your state. Again, we have 574 federally recognized tribes, and you could Google and find out what's in your area and who you want to help as well.
I want to just quickly also give a plug. I think organizations that are helping around education, so cultural centers, resource centers on college campuses. I mean, shameless plug, I would not have graduated college without our cultural center that was dedicated to serving Native students. And there's a lot of those out there. So I think helping support Native students get their education is another great way to, if you want to, some financial organizations, not just our office. I'm not just putting a plug for us, but there are lots of other cultural and resource centers that are helping Native students across the nation, helping support their educations. I am going to answer our poll question. The majority of you got it right. Good job. The answer, it was 1924. I think it's interesting to think about that, right? It was not that long ago on our own land that we were granted the right to citizenship. And then I had mentioned that the Voting Rights Act didn't pass until 1965, which so even up until then, a lot of people were still not allowed to vote or seen as true citizens. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely do some deep dives into some of those laws and policies that were put into place to prohibit Native people from accessing these resources.
We also wanted to remind you guys to donate to the Pooter Heritage Alliance, who's putting on this great panel, because without you guys donating to us, we couldn't do things like this and continue these programs. Thank you.
All right, final question to our panelists. First, thank you to all of you for sharing the things that you've shared and giving your time to this. It's been, I think, remarkable personally for me to share space with you and to hear your stories and get to know you. And I would imagine other folks out there listening that will watch this, especially young Native women, are gonna look to you now as role models and see you as paving the way and creating change for us. What is your call to action to people listening, Native folks and non-Native folks? What do we do when we leave here? What call to action do you have for people that are listening so that as we move forward, we can all be in this together and fight for our rights to vote and breaking down some of these barriers?
The call to action, there's no magical answer. There's no right answer. You all have unique histories and we have a lot of similarities, but you know where you're come from, you know your communities, and there is no right answer. You have a passion, you have a story, you have an experience, whether that's at school, whether it's going to town, whether it's listening to grandma and grandpa talk or aunties and uncles, whatever that is, and you don't like it, and you see something and it causes you to have emotions. Maybe you're happy, maybe you're sad, maybe it causes you to be angry. And then it usually will cause you to act, whether you're just thinking about something or you want to cry or you're hurt or you want to shout or whatever. But whatever that is for you, and you look at life and you look at what makes you happy, what makes you get up for the day, and what you appreciate from where you come from in your family. Find one or two things, and that could be education, it could be protecting animals, it could be a scientist, a doctor. I mean, there's a whole breadth. There's no right or wrong answer. It could be simple things, and you can build upon that, on what you want in life. I would encourage you, if it makes you angry, you can fix it. You can find the perseverance to fix it. Knowing that you can't be angry all the time, because if you go around being an angry person, you're not going to get much action done. You got to be respectful. You got to listen. And we have all those qualities in our ways. And so that would be my call to action, is really self-reflect, think about what you like and what you don't like. And maybe you want to fix something, or maybe you have a passion that you love and you want to be a part of a movement. That would be my call to action for you. And it's okay. You don't have to have all the right answers. You don't have to know the process. Just know that you have resources, whether that's at school, your teachers, you have a mentor, you have a coach, you have a great auntie or uncle or a best friend, whoever that may be in your life. Go and talk to them. Ask your questions. There is no wrong question, and follow that passion. That would be my call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Sasha, how about you?
Thank you. I love what you said, Andy. I'll echo that. I guess my call to action would be vote, but more specifically, not just in the general elections coming up, but your local elections, your county commissioners, your city council, your state reps, your state senators, all kinds of positions are up this coming election cycle. My call to action is, I got two things actually. Your vote does matter, so internalize that. I want you to all internalize that. And two, go make your vote matter. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. Belita?
I like what both of you said. I'm trying to think, because what you two said was basically what I was thinking. So I don't know if I can really add to that. My sister likes to say, if you complain, don't complain if you don't vote. That's one thing you can do, is if you don't vote, then you're kind of not putting your opinion out there, because we talk about several people who didn't participate in the last election. One time they were complaining to us, and we're like, well, did you vote? And they said no. We're like, well, then if you complaining and don't like it, you vote, you make your vote matter. And that's how it works. That's how, the voting process is always working. In addition to what Andy said, is self-reflect, but know that there is failure in some questions that are answered, but don't give up. That's how you learn, is you learn from failure. If you learn that, you didn't vote the last time, you go and vote the next time, and you make your vote matter. That's all I have to say.
Thank you all three for that. I just want to add my call to action for everybody listening. First, thank you again for participating and listening. We're really grateful, even though we can't see you, we're grateful for the space. And I would hope that this is not the last thing that you do. Go out there, do your research, follow Native activists who are on Twitter, organizations that are doing good work. Continue this past this general election, like Sasha was saying. These elections, local level, state level, they're ongoing. Find out what that passion is and find that niche and get involved. And we hope that this is not the one and only or the last thing that you participate in. So, panelists, Yakoke, thank you so much for the time and the stories that you're sharing and the knowledge that you're giving. Again, I know that there's people out there, myself included, who are looking up to all of you and just thankful for the work that you're doing, the representation and the spaces that you're sharing with us. So thank you on behalf of the Native American Cultural Center and the Pooter Heritage Alliance. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa for some kind of wraps up.
Hello, everyone. I'm the random voice you heard in the background. I'm Vanessa Selwyn. I work over with the Pooter Heritage Alliance. I just want to thank everyone who attended, everyone who's watching live stream on Facebook. The more people that hear, great. The more that can see this, great. We did film it, and we will release it on both our YouTube, and it will be up on Facebook in case anyone missed or wants to share this with anyone else. Please subscribe to the Pooter Heritage Alliance, both our Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter. If you want to know, because this is not the end. This Lifting Voices from the Shadows panel is just the beginning of a beautiful grant that it will include lots of amazing videos with amazing Native voices. We would love for you to join us in the future. Thank you. Any questions that were not addressed in this panel, we can email you answers later if you email them to me at admin@pooterheritage.org. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks again for joining.